The stem of the wineglass slipped slightly against Lena Caldwell's fingers as she stared down at her phone. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered: high-rises, red taillights, 1,000 tiny promises, while across the table her husband, Marcus Hale, sliced cleanly into his steak. It was supposed to be simple. Anniversary dinner. Candle in the center of the table. 2 glasses of Bordeaux catching the light. Then, at exactly 8:47 p.m., her screen lit up. One new message. For a second, Lena almost ignored it. No one should have been able to touch this moment, not her board, not her brokers, not even the property manager who seemed to believe a text could fix a flooding penthouse. But the name on the notification turned the room cold. Jonas Ward. She hadn't seen that name in 3 years. Not since the night he'd thrown his keys on her kitchen counter, accused her of choosing her inheritance over their blood, and walked out of her life. Her thumb hovered, then tapped. Lena, get up. Walk out. Don't say a word to your husband. He's planning to take everything from you tonight. The words burned on the dark screen. For a heartbeat, she forgot how to breathe. The candle between them blurred. Somewhere far away, she heard the clink of silverware, the low murmur of other conversations, the soft jazz floating through the restaurant. Across the table, Marcus looked up, that easy smile already in place. "Everything all right?" he asked. His voice was smooth, practiced, just textured enough to sound sincere. Lena's pulse slammed against her ribs. She forced her fingers to relax around the glass, forced her features back into the cool, composed expression she wore in boardrooms and on magazine covers. "Just an update from the office," she said lightly, laying the phone face down on the white tablecloth. Her hand felt numb. "Nothing that can't wait." Marcus chuckled, setting his knife down long enough to reach across and cover her hand with his. In the glow of the candle, his cufflinks flashed, understated and expensive. "On our anniversary," he said. "They can survive one night without Lena Caldwell saving the world. Tonight, you're just my wife." There it was, the line that used to make her chest ache in a good way. My wife. She had once loved the way it sounded. Loved the idea that after years of being introduced as the Caldwell heiress, the new head of Caldwell Holdings, she had finally become something softer, simpler. Lena Hale. A woman with a partner instead of just an empire. After the plane crash that took her parents, she'd been drowning in condolences and contracts. Marcus had appeared in that chaos like a lifeboat, sharp suit, easy laugh, a man who talked more about farmers' markets and travel than leverage ratios and REIT structures. The first night they'd walked into this very restaurant together, she'd felt the knot in her chest loosen for the first time in months. Now, with Jonas's message pulsing in her mind, those memories twisted. Why would Jonas contact her now, after years of silence? Why tonight, of all nights? And why this warning? Her cousin had always been fiercely protective, sometimes infuriatingly so. He'd hated the way the world saw her as a walking balance sheet. When their parents died and Lena stepped into the role everyone expected, he'd told her she was letting the money swallow her whole. He'd left before she could prove him wrong. If anyone could imagine a man using her for her wealth, it would be Jonas. But imagine it was not the same as now. Marcus lifted his wine, watching her over the rim. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked. "You look distracted." "I'm fine," Lena said, hearing the slight echo in her own voice. He launched back into a story about a client who didn't understand the value of patience, about a deal that would put them on another level once it closed. Normally she'd follow every detail, weighing what information he shared, mapping it against what she knew from her own network. Tonight, the words washed over her like meaningless noise. Her mind was replaying every moment she'd handed him a piece of her trust. The way he'd insisted it was inefficient to keep so many accounts scattered between old family banks. The way he'd persuaded her to let his advisor streamline things, just to make your life easier. The way he always redirected the conversation when she asked to meet that advisor alone. Had those ever been the habits of a loving husband, or the careful choreography of a man studying his target? Lena's gaze drifted to the candle, its flame steady between them. On any other night, she would have let this image sink in as proof that she'd finally made it through the storm, the girl who lost everything sitting in a sky-high restaurant, married to a man who adored her, looking out over a city she practically owned. Instead, that same image now felt like evidence. Evidence of how much she stood to lose. Because if Jonas was right, then this wasn't just a nice dinner. It was a stage. A setup. A closing act in a performance she didn't know she was in. Lena tightened her grip on the stem of her glass and smiled across the table, playing the role one more time. To understand why that single text could shatter her perfect evening and how it would lead to a takedown that saved her fortune, you have to know what Lena Caldwell had built since the night she buried her parents, and what it had already cost her long before Jonas Ward's name lit up her phone. Before we begin, tap subscribe so you never miss the next story. After the crash, there had been no time to fall apart. Within 48 hours of the funeral, bankers began calling. Advisors. Lawyers who'd spoken to her parents more than she had in their last year alive. Caldwell Holdings wasn't just a stack of properties, it was a web of loans, joint ventures, and contracts that needed signatures from someone who wasn't dead. Lena was 27 when she slid into her father's chair at the head of the long conference table. She still remembered the weight of it, the mahogany, the eyes, the quiet expectation that she would either prove herself or become an expensive disaster. She signed what they put in front of her, at first. Then she started reading. Then she started changing things. In 2 years, she doubled the company's downtown portfolio. Converted half-empty warehouses into luxury lofts. Turned a fading shopping center into the kind of mixed-use monument that magazines fawned over. Articles called her the Iron Heiress and the woman who owns the skyline. Jonas hated those headlines. He'd sat on her couch in ripped jeans and old band tees, shaking his head while the news anchors speculated about her net worth. "They're not talking about you," he'd said once, flicking the remote off. "They're talking about the money they wish they could get their hands on." "You make it sound like the world is out to rob me," she joked. He hadn't laughed. When probate settled and the numbers were finally clear, Jonas received his share of the estate. Lena assumed they'd navigate their grief together. Instead, they'd had one brutal argument, the last conversation they'd shared. He'd accused her of letting the lawyers turn their parents into line items. Said she cared more about preserving the empire than remembering the people who built it. She'd thrown back that somebody had to keep the company from collapsing and that he was free to opt out if the responsibility scared him. He'd taken the out. He'd left his keys on the counter and walked out. Weeks later she heard, through a cousin's cousin, that he'd sold his stake in the family holdings and disappeared into some kind of research work that involved too much travel and not enough details. He had every reason to resent her. Which made his text tonight even more disorienting. Back at the restaurant, Marcus laughed at something he'd just said about a client. Lena realized she had no idea what story he'd been telling. "I lost you," he teased, eyes softening. "Usually you're correcting my projections before I finish a sentence." She managed a small smile. "Just tired. Long day." He nodded, but his gaze flicked to the upside-down phone on the table, then back to her face. For the first time, the look didn't feel like concern. It felt like calculation. Her mind began quietly rearranging their history, piece by piece. The way he'd called her overworked when she insisted on staying involved in the smallest deals. The gentle pressure to let people help by consolidating her accounts with his financial planner, Helena. His insistence that her longtime family attorney didn't understand modern structuring and that his guy, Victor, could simplify things with a few updated documents. At the time, it had sounded like care. Now, simmering under Jonas's warning, it sounded like control. Her phone vibrated again, a quick buzz against the linen. Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You know," he said lightly, "if your team can't manage one night without you, maybe we should reconsider this whole anniversary thing. Next year I'll just book the corner conference room at Caldwell Tower and bring takeout." He was joking. He always joked. But there was an edge to it she hadn't heard before. "I'll make it up to you," she said, reaching for the device. "Let me just put out this fire." She'd barely glanced at the screen. "We need to talk now." "Don't drink anything he gives you." Before pushing her chair back. "I'm going to hit the restroom," she said, grabbing her clutch. "I'll be right back." "Want me to order dessert?" Marcus asked. "Surprise me." She turned away before he could read anything in her expression. Crossing the dining room, Lena felt every movement as if she were acting in slow motion. The clink of cutlery. The murmur of conversation. The faint scent of truffle and seared meat. The city lights stretching beyond the glass made everything inside feel staged, as if she were walking through a set instead of her own life. Halfway to the corridor that led to the restrooms, she paused to allow a server to pass. Reflexively, she glanced back at their table. Marcus was not watching her. He was bent over his own phone, shoulders slightly hunched, thumbs moving fast. When the server stepped aside and his gaze lifted, he saw her looking. In one quick, practiced motion, he tilted the screen away and slipped the phone face down beside his plate. Lena's stomach dropped. She didn't pretend to stop at the mirror in the hallway. She went straight into the women's room, locked herself in the farthest stall, and hit call on Jonas's name before she could talk herself out of it. The line rang once. "Lena." His voice was low, breathless, as if he'd been pacing. "Tell me you're not alone with him." She swallowed. "Hello to you, too. This isn't a joke." "I'm at dinner," she said, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. "At the Skylark. Marcus is at the table. You have about 30 seconds to explain why you decided to text me from the dead." Silence crackled on the line. She could hear traffic in the background on his end, a horn, a siren fading in the distance. "I should have come to you sooner," Jonas said. "I thought I had more time." "I was wrong." "About what?" she demanded. "About Marcus Hale," he said. "Because that's not his name." The cold tile underneath her heels suddenly felt unsteady. "Come again?" "His real name is Marcus Hellstrom," Jonas said. "He's been on and off my radar for 2 years. He targets wealthy women, mostly widows, heiresses, business owners with control over family money. He charms them, marries them, consolidates their assets, drains everything, disappears. New identity, new city, repeat." Lena leaned against the stall door, her knees threatening to buckle. "This is insane," she whispered. "You're basing this on what, a feeling? Something you read on a forum?"
I'm basing it on bank records, Jonas snapped.
On shell corporations tied to his so-called investment firm. On 3 other women who lost everything after marrying a man who looks exactly like your husband with a different name on his passport. Her breath hitched.
Other women?
Chicago.
San Diego.
Phoenix, he said.
I'm sending you files. You'll see the pattern.
A part of her wanted to end the call, march back to the table, and demand an explanation that would make all of this sound absurd. Another part, the part that had built an empire out of chaos, was cataloging each detail, weighing it.
If this is true, she said slowly, why now? Why tonight? Because tonight is when he finishes, Jonas said. I finally got someone at the bank to talk. There's a timestamped transfer authorization queued on your joint accounts.
It goes active if certain documents arrive with your signature. Lena's mind snagged on a memory, the slim, cream folder Marcus had left on the kitchen island that morning, all casual charm.
Just some updates from Victor, he'd said. We can go through them together after dinner. Nothing major.
Her skin crawled. And there's something else, Jonas added, his voice dropping even lower. One of the women in Phoenix, she remembers him insisting she celebrate with just one more glass of wine the night before the transfers went through.
Toxicology from her hospital records showed an unprescribed sedative.
For a moment, the candlelit restaurant, the expensive wine, Marcus's hand over hers, all of it seemed to tilt sideways in her mind. You're saying he plans to drug me, she said. I'm saying don't drink anything he puts in front of you, Jonas replied.
And don't sign a single thing. Walk out of there right now. I'll meet you outside. We have a lot to cover and not much time.
Lena pressed her palm to her forehead. Everything in her life had trained her to act, to decide, to pull the ripcord before the plane hit the ground.
Walk out. Call security. Call her lawyer. Let Marcus find an empty chair and an ice-cold seat. It would be the safest move.
It would also mean taking Jonas's word on faith, the same cousin who'd left her bleeding after calling her a sellout. The same man who hadn't been there when she had to face 200 employees and promised them Caldwell Holdings was secure. What exactly do you have? She asked.
Proof. Not theories. Proof.
I've been working with a private investigator, Jonas said. We've got documentation on the aliases, company registrations tied to his name, statements from 2 of his former marks.
Enough to make federal agents pay attention once we get the rest. The rest?
You, he said.
He's inside your accounts now, Lena. You're his jackpot. If he moves on you and we catch it in real time, it's not just about saving your money. It's about putting him away.
Her heart pounded so hard it hurt.
Jonas, Please, he cut in.
The word landed heavier than she expected, wrapped in something that sounded like regret.
I walked away when you needed me. I'm not doing it again. Get up. Leave. Let me protect you for once.
The last stall in the women's room suddenly felt too small. Lena stared at the faint scuff marks on the door, at the shadow of her own hand trembling against it. She could leave and spend the rest of her life wondering what Marcus might have confessed if she'd given him the chance. Or she could stay long enough to see the man across the table clearly, for who he really was. Her training as a CEO, as a strategist, clicked into place. What if, she said slowly, we don't just stop him? What if we let him show his hand? Lena. You said agents would pay attention with real-time evidence, she continued.
So let's get it.
If he's planning to move against me tonight, then tonight is also our best shot at catching him.
You are not a cop, Jonas hissed. You're not bait.
I'm not bait, she agreed.
I'm the owner of the accounts he thinks he controls. That gives me leverage. Silence hummed between them.
Where are you? She asked.
Across the street, Jonas admitted reluctantly. I've been watching the entrance.
I wanted to make sure he actually took you here before I reached out.
Of course he had.
Of course he'd been shadowing her instead of just calling like a normal human being.
Good, she said. Stay there. I'll come out in 15 minutes. We'll talk, and then you can show me everything you've got. 15 minutes is too long.
It's what you're getting, Lena said.
If you're right, I'm not walking into this blind. And if you're wrong?
If I'm wrong, you get to throw it in my face for the rest of our lives, he said.
Fine. 15. But if you're not out by then, I'm coming in. She ended the call before he could say anything else.
For a moment she stood there, phone slack in her hand, pulse roaring in her ears. Then she straightened, unlocked the stall, and caught sight of herself in the mirror.
The red dress.
The polished hair.
The careful makeup.
She looked exactly like the glossy magazine covers, Lena Caldwell, untouchable. Tonight, she felt anything but. She dabbed at the corners of her eyes to erase the faint redness, smoothed her features into something calm, and walked back out toward the dining room. Marcus rose slightly as she approached, a gentlemanly half-stand before he sat back down.
Everything okay? He asked. Fine.
She slid into her chair, nudging her untouched wineglass an inch farther away.
Just work drama. They'll live. I ordered dessert, he announced, brightening. Flourless chocolate torte, extra dark.
I figured you'd appreciate something that doesn't pretend to be anything it's not.
Lena almost laughed at the irony.
He poured her more wine without asking, the deep red liquid swirling into her glass. She placed her hand over the rim before he finished.
I should probably slow down, she said lightly. Big meeting tomorrow. I don't want to show up with a headache. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance?
Frustration, before the smile snapped back into place.
Of course, he said. We can always open another bottle at home.
Her skin prickled. He launched into a toast, talking about how proud he was of her, how lucky he felt, how no one deserved happiness more than she did. If she hadn't heard Jonas's voice in that bathroom, she might have cried. Instead, she listened to every word like evidence. When the dessert arrived, he watched her take the first bite with almost unnatural focus. She set the fork down after a single taste, suddenly too nauseous to swallow more. You look pale, Marcus said.
Are you sure you're all right? Lena let her shoulders sag just enough. Actually,
I don't feel great, she admitted. That part, at least, wasn't a lie. I think the week caught up with me.
Concern rearranged his features. We can go, he said immediately. I'll get the check.
He signaled for their server, quick and efficient, as if he'd already been prepared to leave at a moment's notice. As he settled the bill, Lena slipped her phone into her clutch, her mind racing. If Jonas was right, Marcus needed privacy to move.
Space. Time alone with her.
Whatever came next tonight, it couldn't happen in a crowded restaurant with 100 witnesses and cameras at every exit. Which meant the safest place for now was the most counterintuitive one. "Let's not make a big deal of it," she said when Marcus reached for her chair. "You stay and finish your wine, I'm just going to grab a car and head home. I'll probably feel better once I'm out of these heels." "I'll come with you," he said. "Too quickly." She shook her head, forcing a tired smile. "You were so excited about that bottle. Please. Enjoy it. I'll text when I'm home." He hesitated, the muscles in his jaw working. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. "Only if you promise to rest," he said. "No laptop. No calls. You have my word." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. His lips were warm. Comforting. Familiar. Lena told herself she would remember this moment later, not as a goodbye between lovers, but as the last time she let him touch her without knowing the truth. She walked toward the exit, every step echoing louder than the last. The maitre d' offered to call a car. She declined and pushed through the revolving door alone. The chill night air hit her like a reset. Across the street, she spotted a figure leaning against a lamppost, hood up, posture tense. Even from this distance, she knew it was Jonas. Behind her, 30 floors up, a man she'd let into every corner of her life lifted his wineglass, believing, for the next 15 minutes, that his plan was still intact. When the glass door whispered shut behind her, Lena Caldwell stepped out of the role of dutiful wife and into something new. Whatever happened next, her life as she'd known it was over. Jonas pushed his hood back as she crossed the street. For a second, neither of them moved. They just looked at each other, two people who'd shared a childhood, a funeral, a spectacular falling out, and now a sidewalk at the edge of a very expensive nightmare. Up close, he looked older than she remembered. Same sharp jaw, same restless eyes, but edged with new lines and a roughness that didn't come from bar fights or bad decisions. It looked like the kind of tiredness you earn from chasing something that keeps changing shape. "Hey, Lena," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. A dozen things she could say fought to be first. "Where were you? How dare you?" "Thank you," but urgency shoved them all aside. "You said 15 minutes, he added. "You took 10. That's progress." She exhaled a short, humorless laugh. "You said he's going to take everything. That bumped you to the top of my to-do list." Jonas's mouth tugged into a grim not-quite smile. "Come on. We shouldn't talk out here." He led her down the block and around the corner, away from the glowing restaurant signs and valet lights, into a narrower side street that smelled like wet concrete and exhaust. A nondescript brick building loomed halfway down, the kind of place eyes slid past. "Third floor," he said, punching in a code at the security door. "If anyone asks, you're here to yell at me, not to plan a takedown." "I can multitask," she muttered, stepping inside. The elevator groaned them up to 3. Jonas unlocked a metal door at the end of the hall and swung it open with his foot. The place was small but organized, a converted studio with bare brick walls, a mattress on a platform, a scuffed desk buried under neatly stacked files and a pair of monitors. The only decoration was a giant corkboard crowded with photos, printouts, and red string. The board alone made her ribs tighten. "Wow," Lena said. "You've upgraded from conspiracy theory basement to conspiracy theory loft." "Rent's cheaper on Paranoia if you pay 6 months at a time," Jonas said. "Sit." He pulled the one decent chair away from the desk and motioned her into it. He took the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees. For a second, his tough expression cracked. "Before anything," he said, "I'm sorry." Lena blinked.
I knew you were hurting too, he went on. After Mom and Dad. I didn't know how to watch you step into their world without them. It felt like you were choosing the company over us. There was no us left to choose, she said, the old ache flaring. There was just me and a pile of contracts. I know. He scrubbed a hand over his face. I said unforgivable things and then I ran instead of fixing it. I thought if I stayed away, at least I wouldn't drag you into what I was working on. But then your husband's name showed up where it shouldn't, and suddenly staying away wasn't protecting you, it was putting you in the line of fire. He met her eyes, guilt stark in his. I am sorry, Lena, he repeated. For leaving you alone with all of this. For being 3 years late. The words landed heavier than she expected. She felt the old anger lurch, then stumble, edged out by something that hurt more, relief. We're not done talking about any of that, she said. But if I lose my company tonight because we paused for a therapy session, I'll be annoyed forever. Show me what you've got. Jonas nodded and turned to the desk. When the dual monitors flared to life, the room shifted from personal to tactical. He dragged a window open, a grid of photos, documents, and spreadsheets. This is Marcus Hellstrom, he said, tapping the first image. It was Marcus, but not. Same handsome face, same easy posture, but the details were wrong. Longer hair. A different beard. A different name and the caption of a photocopied driver's license. Jonas cycled through images, wedding photos from other cities, other women. Hotel check-ins. A security camera still of him holding a bouquet outside what looked like a courthouse. Each time, he wore a different life like a tailored suit. Beneath the photos were logos, investment firms, shell companies, consulting outfits. Some she recognized. Most of the time she didn't. Hellstrom has been using variations of the same pattern for at least 8 years, Jonas said. Find a woman with access to wealth. Build trust fast. Get involved in her finances under the guise of helping. Introducing his team. Then, when everything's consolidated. He dragged another folder into view, bank statements, wire confirmations, loan defaults. Chicago, he said, opening one. Amelia Grayson. Family manufacturing business. She marries him under the name Michael Hartman. Within a year, her personal holdings are restructured into a joint trust with him as trustee. 6 months later, the trust is empty. She loses her house to cover margin calls on loans she never authorized. He clicked again. San Diego. Priya Desai. Tech acquisition. He's Ethan Cole this time. Same pattern. Same players. She's still in bankruptcy proceedings. Another. Phoenix. Nora Alvarez. Widow of a contractor. He's Mark Collins. She ends up hospitalized with unexplained sedation while pages of estate documents appear with her signature. She swears she doesn't remember signing them. 2 weeks later, the accounts are cleared out. Lena stared at the screen until the words blurred. 2 women in bankruptcy. 1 in the hospital. All with the same smile at their side. And me, she said quietly. Number 4. You're supposed to be the grand finale, Jonas said. The biggest payout. Caldwell Holdings isn't just money in the bank, it's real assets, leverage. Once he gets control, he can strip anything that isn't bolted to the foundation. He pulled a new document into view, a PDF labeled Victor Lorne, ESQ.
Which brings us to his co-stars, Jonas said. Victor Lorne. Claims to be a specialist in estate and trust law. Harvard degree, impressive CV, all fake. License number belongs to a real lawyer who's been retired for a decade. I've traced Victor through 3 cities in 2 of Hellstrom's previous identities. A photo showed a man in his 50s with silver hair and kind eyes, the type you'd instinctively trust with your last will. And Helena Price, Jonas continued, opening another file. Registered as a financial advisor with a boutique firm in New York. The firm exists on paper but has no physical office. She funnels client assets into consolidated vehicles that lead to shell companies controlled by Hellstrom. A woman in a navy dress smiled from the screen, all crisp professionalism and understated luxury. Lena's stomach twisted. She'd never met Helena in person. Marcus had always said their schedules didn't align. Now she understood why. Jonas switched to a high-resolution scan of a legal document. Lena recognized the Caldwell crest at the top before she even read the title. Durable financial power of attorney, she murmured. Her own signature looped across the bottom, right next to Marcus's. Her blood went cold. I didn't sign this, she said. Look at the date, Jonas said softly. She did. The timestamp placed it on a Monday morning she clearly remembered, because she'd spent that entire day on site at a groundbreaking in New Jersey. No, she whispered. I wasn't even in the city. Exactly, Jonas said. It's a clean forgery, but it's a forgery. He's been feeding your handwriting into software, then refining the output. Helena and Victor provide the paperwork. He supplies the signatures. He flipped to a spreadsheet. These are your accounts, Jonas said. The ones you know about. And these, he tapped a second column of numbered entities, are the shells he's already moved small amounts into. Think of them as test runs. Make sure no one at the bank flags the routing before he pushes the big transfers through. She skimmed the entries. The amounts started small, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, then ticked higher in recent weeks. 50. 100. 200. How much has he taken so far? She asked. From your personal liquidity? Jonas said. Roughly 800 grand. Chump change, considering what he's lining up. Lena exhaled through her teeth. And tonight, she asked. What was supposed to happen? Jonas opened one last document, a set of wire transfer instructions, half completed, queued in a secure banking system he clearly had no business accessing. Victor submitted these earlier today, Jonas said. They're on hold until the bank receives the final package of documents, these. He tapped another folder, more powers of attorney, trust amendments, and transfer authorizations bearing her forged signature. When those hit the system, he continued, a total of $3.9 million goes to entities tied to Helena and Victor. There's also language positioning your joint trust as sole controlling member of Caldwell Holdings in the event of your incapacitation, with Marcus as acting trustee. Lena's hands clenched. Meaning, she said, if something happened to me tonight. He wouldn't need your cooperation to sign everything else away, Jonas finished. He'd have it already. In writing. According to the system, you agreed to all of it sober and smiling. She stood abruptly and crossed to the window, staring out at the dark alley below. She thought of the wine he'd poured, the insistence on just one more glass, the way his eyes had flicked to her untouched drink. If she'd stayed, if she'd let herself relax, how easy would it have been to blame her confusion on fatigue, on alcohol, while he slid documents in front of her? You were right to walk out, Jonas said behind her.
Tonight could have been catastrophic. Lena swallowed hard and turned back to him. Okay, she said. We know what he wants. We know how he plans to take it. Step 2, make sure he fails.
They left the apartment 10 minutes later, Lena in Jonas's hoodie with the hood up, hair hidden, face bare. To any cameras, she'd look like a woman leaving a bad date, not an heiress evading a husband. Robert Sanders' townhouse sat in an old brownstone row not far from Caldwell's original offices. Lights burned in his front windows despite the hour. The man slept less than most corporations. He opened the door before they could ring twice.
Jonas called, Robert said.
His voice was rough with age and caffeine and something like fury.
Get inside.
He ushered them into his study, floor-to-ceiling books, a massive desk, a pair of leather armchairs that had seen better years.
Start from the text, Robert said, snapping his fingers at Jonas for the files. Do not dramatize. I am already adequately alarmed.
Lena repeated everything as calmly as she could: the dinner, the message, Jonas's call, the evidence, the forged power of attorney. Saying it aloud made it feel both more real and more distant, like she was recounting someone else's disaster.
Robert's jaw tightened with each new detail.
He picked up the forged document with a gloved hand, eyes narrowing.
This is a sophisticated fake, he said. But the notary stamp is wrong. Sloppy. Whoever they used forgot we changed notaries last year after the incident with the zoning hearings. I don't remember signing anything with your present, Lena said. That's because you didn't, Robert said.
Lena, if any bank or court calls asking about this, you say 6 words, my counsel and I never signed.
Understood? She nodded. Robert turned to Jonas. You said there are transfers queued?
Jonas slid the wire instructions across the desk.
These go live once the bank thinks it has everything. We need them frozen before he logs in again. Robert picked up his phone. I've represented Caldwell Holdings for 32 years, he said as he dialed. If anyone at Northbridge Bank argues when I tell them to stop, I'll personally underwrite their early retirement.
He spoke for several minutes, tone crisp and lethal. Lena caught phrases like temporary injunction, pending investigation, and potentially compromised credentials. When he hung up, some of the tightness in her chest eased. Your main accounts are frozen, Robert said.
Any attempt to move substantial funds triggers a call to me and a fraud review committee. Unfortunately, smaller transfers may have already slipped through.
We'll trace them later. And Caldwell, she asked.
The company? Robert sighed.
That's where your charming husband got creative, he said. He's been trying to reroute voting control through that trust you mentioned. If the forged documents had been recorded, Marcus is Marcus, whoever would have had de facto authority over major decisions if you were deemed incapacitated.
Tonight was likely meant to establish that condition.
So he'd drug me, wave some papers, and move on with my signature, Lena said.
And if anyone questioned it, the trust paperwork would back him up. Exactly.
Robert's knuckles were white around the forged pages.
He got very close. But close is not done. Not while I'm breathing. Lena exhaled.
Freezing the accounts keeps him from stealing the money, she said.
But it doesn't put him away.
No, Jonas agreed. For that, we need him to try. And we need to be watching when he does. Robert shot him a sharp look.
You're not suggesting. I'm suggesting we let him think he's winning, Lena cut in.
Both men turned to her. If he realizes the accounts are frozen because we caught him, he disappears, she said.
He's done this before.
He knows how to vanish.
We need him to be arrogant enough to keep playing. Robert frowned. That's a dangerous game.
So is letting him walk, she replied.
I'm not interested in simply surviving this. I want him in handcuffs.
Jonas's gaze sharpened.
There's someone who can help with that.
Janet Reeves arrived 20 minutes later, hair still damp from a shower, dark blazer thrown over a t-shirt and jeans. She carried a small duffel bag and the kind of energy that suggested she'd already lived 3 lives before this one. "Miss Caldwell," she said, offering a firm handshake.
"I've been wanting to meet you under better circumstances."
"You're the private investigator," Lena said.
"Among other things," Janet replied. "Financial crimes are my specialty. I've been tracking Hellstrom since Chicago. Jonas pulled me in when your husband started pinging our radar."
She dropped the duffel on Robert's desk and unzipped it. Inside were small black cases, a laptop, and a tangle of wires.
"Here's the situation as I see it," Janet said. "Accounts are frozen." "Good. That gives us protection. But Hellstrom doesn't know that yet. When he discovers resistance, he'll assume it's a bureaucratic snag, not a full shutdown, at least at first. That's our window." "Our window for what?" Lena asked, though she already knew.
"For letting him incriminate himself on tape," Janet said.
"You're the only person he'll talk openly to. He trusts you."
The words landed like a stone.
"Lucky me," Lena said. Janet's expression softened. "I know this is brutal.
But the fastest way to stop predators like him is to use the same intimacy they weaponize.
Make him comfortable. Let him brag. Let him explain his genius. They always do, eventually." "What does that look like, practically?" Robert asked.
Janet opened one of the black cases and held up something the size of a matchbox with a thin wire attached.
"This is a recording device," she said. "Clips to your bra strap, runs all day. Battery life is 8 hours. Audio quality is excellent, even through clothing. We'll also place a passive recorder in your kitchen. Most people talk freely when they think they're just making coffee." "And his calls?" Jonas asked. "You said you could tap them."
"I can't tap without a warrant," Janet corrected.
"But we can record the side of the conversation in your house."
"Put his phone down anywhere near the device, we hear both ends."
She glanced at Lena.
"I assume he keeps his phone close." "He sleeps with it within reach," Lena said.
"Good," Janet replied. "We'll make the nightstand your friend."
They talked about logistics for another hour. The plan, in the end, was simple and vicious.
Lena would go home in the morning.
She would act shaken, embarrassed, and apologetic for leaving dinner abruptly. She'd blame stress, grief, the weight of the company, anything but him. She'd let him comfort her.
Let him reframe the narrative.
If he brought up the documents, she'd feign hazy memories.
Let him explain what they were really for. Let him convince her again.
Every word would be recorded. Meanwhile, Robert would maintain the freeze on her accounts, working quietly with a contact in the Federal Financial Crimes Unit.
If Marcus attempted any large transfers, alarms would go off in more places than one.
Janet would station herself nearby with surveillance gear and a direct line to the agents.
Jonas would act as liaison, running data between them all. "Once we have enough on tape," Janet said, and he tries to execute the transfers despite resistance, the feds can move.
They're hungry for a clean romance fraud case with a clear trail.
Yours is a buffet. Lena tried to imagine the next day. The next conversation.
The next time Marcus wrapped his arms around her. Her stomach flipped.
What if I can't pull it off? She asked quietly. What if he sees through me? Janet shook her head. He won't.
Men like him believe in their performance more than they believe in other people's perceptions.
Your doubt will read as guilt, not suspicion.
You're not confronting him, you're confessing your own supposed flaws.
That's his favorite script. Jonas leaned forward.
I'll be close, he said. If anything feels off, if you feel unsafe, you call, text, send a smoke signal, I don't care.
We'll get you out.
Robert cleared his throat. And for the record, he added, if at any point you decide this is too much, we can pivot to a less risky strategy.
You don't owe anyone a performance, not even justice. Lena looked at each of them in turn. Jonas, brittle with guilt but steady. Janet, professional and unflinching. Robert, furious on her behalf.
And somewhere across the city, the man who had studied her enough to know how she took her coffee and how she signed her name.
He thinks he's the only one who can plan, she said. Let's prove him wrong. Dawn crept over the skyline as Lena's car pulled up in front of her building. She hadn't slept. None of them had.
Robert had insisted she shower in his guest bath so she didn't walk in smelling like fear and stale restaurant air.
Janet had clipped the recorder into place with clinical efficiency, then tested it twice. Tap the top left of your necklace if you need me to hear something clearly, Janet had said.
3 taps in a row means this is important. Now, in the elevator, Lena felt the device like a ghost against her skin. Her phone buzzed with messages from Marcus, stacked one after another.
Are you okay?
Where did you go?
I'm worried. Please call me. Lena, this isn't like you. I'm coming home if you don't answer.
She took one steadying breath, unlocked her door, and stepped inside.
Lena?
His voice came from the kitchen. He appeared a second later, barefoot in jeans and a t-shirt, hair mussed like he'd been running his hands through it. Dark circles smudged the skin under his eyes.
He looked human.
Vulnerable. It would have been disarming if she didn't know better. Oh, thank God, he said, crossing the room in 3 long strides. He pulled her into a hug so tight it startled a sound out of her. She let herself sag into it, counting the beats of his heart against her cheek. You scared me, he murmured into her hair.
I thought something happened.
I'm sorry, she said, voice muffled.
I shouldn't have just left.
He pulled back to search her face. You vanished, he said.
1 minute you're at the table, the next minute the maitre d' is telling me you took a car. What happened? Did I do something? Perfect.
She let her eyes shimmer.
I just hit a wall, she said. The last few weeks. The company. The anniversary. It all piled up. I felt like I couldn't breathe. His gaze softened.
You could have told me, he said.
I'm your husband.
The word scraped across her nerves.
I know, she said quickly. I panicked.
I went to clear my head and then I felt stupid for being dramatic, so I stayed at a hotel. No mention of Jonas.
Of Janet. Of midnight strategy sessions.
Her life, edited down to an emotional wobble. I kept thinking you'd call, he said. I didn't want to see disappointment on your face, she replied. His shoulders relaxed. The tension in his jaw loosened. She watched the narrative rewrite itself in his head. Not my Mark is suspicious, but my poor overwhelmed wife had a breakdown. That's not a disappointment, he said. That's a concern. There's a difference. He stroked her cheek with his thumb, gentle. I'm sorry I've let things get to this point, he went on. Maybe I've pushed you too hard about money stuff. I just wanted to make sure you were protected. That everything was handled so you didn't have to carry it alone. There it was, the hook and the knife in the same sentence. Lena swallowed, nodded. I know, she said. And I appreciate it. I think I let my guard down last night because of something else. Oh? His eyes sharpened. Stay soft, she reminded herself. Stay messy. Jonas texted me, she said. Out of nowhere. He said some horrible things about you, about your intentions. It threw me. There. A seed of truth wrapped in a lie. Marcus stiffened. What did he say? He asked, tone carefully neutral. That you married me for my money, she said, letting the words wobble. That you were planning something with my accounts. It sounded insane, but it got into my head. I didn't want to ruin dinner with paranoia, so I just left. It was childish. She dropped her gaze as if ashamed. Silence stretched. Then he laughed softly, relief evident. Lena, he said, tilting her chin up. Your cousin has always resented the company. He sees everything through that lens. Of course he'd assume the worst about a man who happens to love a woman with money. He said he had proof, she whispered. Proof of what? Marcus said, spreading his hands. That I moved some investments into safer vehicles? That I set up a trust to make sure Caldwell survives if something happens to you? That I work with a lawyer and advisor who know what they're doing? He was good. Calm. Just indignant enough. I should have trusted you instead of him, she said. He kissed her forehead again. Let me show you, he said. Transparency, right? That's what we promised each other. He led her to the kitchen island where the cream folder still sat, just as she'd remembered. Victor sent over updated documents, he said, flipping it open. We talked about this last week. We did, she asked, feigning confusion. You've been so busy, I'm not surprised you don't remember every detail, he said smoothly. We've been consolidating loose assets, cleaning up old structures your parents put in place. This, he tapped a page, simply gives the trust clearer authority if you're incapacitated. God forbid. It protects the company from a power vacuum. Robert would agree if he wasn't so stuck in old models. I don't remember signing this, she said, letting a frown crease her brow. You were exhausted, Marcus said. We skimmed the highlights. You said you trusted me, signed, and then fell asleep on the couch halfway through that documentary about Icelandic horses. He chuckled at the memory that had never happened. Honestly, I felt guilty taking advantage of you being so tired, he added. Maybe that's why your subconscious is spitting it back up as doubt. Every word slid into place like a rehearsed script. Lena nodded slowly, as if it made sense. Maybe, she said. I'm sorry I let Jonas get to me. You don't need to apologize, he said. You've lost a lot. People like him thrive on that.
He folded the documents back into the folder and closed it. "Tell you what," he said. "Why don't you rest for a bit? I'll make breakfast. We can talk through everything later, line by line, if that'll help quiet the noise in your head." "That sounds good," she said. She let him guide her toward the bedroom, let him tuck her in with what would have once felt like tenderness. As soon as he left the room, she rolled onto her side, eyes open, staring at the doorway. The recording device hummed silently against her skin. From the kitchen, she heard the faint clink of dishes. Then, a few minutes later, his voice. "Helena," Marcus said. "Yeah, it's me. We're back on track." Lena's heart thudded. He must have set his phone on the counter near the hidden recorder Janet had installed that morning while he ran down to the car with a supposed forgotten scarf. "She bought it," Marcus said, voice low but clear. "Jonas got in her head, but I flipped it. She thinks she had an anxiety episode." A pause. Helena's voice was a faint murmur on the other side of the line, too soft to make out, but the tone carried. "Doesn't matter about the freeze," he said. "Banks glitch all the time. We push through the wires and let Victor handle any red tape. Windows open today, we move everything by 3 p.m., understood?" Lena's fingers dug into the bedsheet. 3 p.m. "Yeah," Marcus continued. "Same entities, same amounts. She'll sign whatever else we need once I get her properly calmed down. Just make sure your people are ready. I don't want this dragging into tomorrow." Another pause. "If this gets hung up," he said, "we pivot to Plan B. Belize isn't going anywhere." The call ended with a cheerful little ding. A moment later, another rang through. "Victor," Marcus said. "We're green. Northbridge is whining about compliance, but it's noise. Have your team coordinate with Helena's? We move today. And for God's sake, double-check the notary this time. I don't want some dinosaur like Sanders sniffing around a bad stamp." Lena almost smiled despite herself. Too late. By the time he realized which dinosaur was on the other end, the trap would be closed. She forced her breathing to even out as footsteps padded back toward the bedroom. Marcus peered in, saw her sleeping, and retreated to the kitchen again. A few minutes later, the smell of coffee drifted down the hall. He started humming under his breath some upbeat tune he always put on when cooking, the soundtrack to their Sunday mornings. Lena pushed herself upright and walked slowly to the living room. She sank onto the couch, watching him from the doorway as he cracked eggs into a pan, hips swaying slightly to the music only he could hear. If a stranger walked in right now, they'd see a devoted husband making breakfast for his tired wife. They'd see warmth, domesticity, a slice of normal life. What they wouldn't see was the study behind it. The way he'd learned exactly which tones softened her defenses. The way he'd switched from aggrieved to reassuring the second she played the guilty card. The way he'd engineered every step of their marriage like a business deal, with her as the acquisition and her assets as the prize. This man never loved her, she realized. He'd assessed her. Analyzed her. Customized himself to fit the outline of the woman she needed him to be. And now, in his mind, today was payoff day. Almost ready, Marcus called over his shoulder. "I made the omelet the way you like it, more spinach, less cheese. Gotta keep the Queen of the Skyline powered up." "Smells great," Lena said. She glanced at the clock. 9:07 a.m. In 6 hours, if he had his way, $3.9 million would vanish into offshore accounts. In 6 hours, if she had her way,
federal agents would be waiting at the other end of those wires. Lena folded her hands in her lap, the recorder warm against her skin, and let her expression soften into something approximating love. He believed he was about to win. He had no idea that every word he spoke, every step he took toward her fortune, was bringing him closer to the edge of a cliff he'd built with his own hands. The countdown had started. By early afternoon, the city glittered the way it always did when people thought their money was safe. Marcus checked his watch for the 5th time. "Bank nonsense," he said, grabbing his jacket from the back of a chair. "I'll go down there in person and get them to push everything through. Bureaucrats listen better when you're wearing a suit." Lena, curled on the couch with a blanket and a deliberately untouched cup of tea, looked up with a tired smile. "Thank you," she said. "I don't have the energy to deal with anyone today." He bent to kiss her temple. "That's what you have me for," he murmured. She held still until the door shut behind him, then reached for her phone. "He's on the move," she texted. "Janet. Jonas. Robert." The group thread lit up. On Janet's laptop, a separate window ticked to life, a secure login to Northbridge's fraud monitoring portal, courtesy of Robert's very expensive relationships. Another screen showed live metadata from Lena's accounts. "Eyes on him," Janet said, parked in a car half a block from the bank. Dark suit, blue tie, walking like he already bought the place. Inside the marble lobby, cameras watched Marcus smile at the receptionist, then vanish into a private banking room. Numbers began to jump. "First wire initiated," Jonas reported, hunched beside Janet with a tablet balanced on his knees. "900,000 to Haldane Global Holdings. That's Helena's shell." Another line. Another. "Total moved, 3.9, Janet said. 1.4 pending. He's going for the whole package." Robert's voice crackled over the speaker. "Emergency freeze is signed. Judges move faster when you show them forged powers of attorney." He hit a key. In the bank's back office, a compliance officer blinked as the system flashed, "Federal freeze order, do not process, contact counsel." On the screen in Janet's car, the last transfer flipped from pending to rejected. "It's done," she said. "He's holding smoke." They watched Marcus emerge 10 minutes later, jaw clenched, a banker trailing behind him with an apologetic expression. Whatever explanation he'd been given wasn't the one he wanted. He cut through the lobby, bypassing the main doors in favor of a side exit that spilled onto a quieter street. "He thinks he's slipping away," Jonas muttered. "That's fine," Janet said, starting the engine. "He'll run straight home to the only thing he still thinks he controls." He hit the apartment like a storm. The door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled. Lena sat where she'd been for the last hour, on the sofa, legs crossed, hands loose in her lap. "Calm on the outside. Wire lives on the inside." "Rough day?" she asked, looking up. His eyes were bright with fury. Sweat beaded at his temples. "The bank froze our accounts," he snapped. "All of them. Personal, trust, corporate. Some kind of compliance review." Lena tilted her head. "Our accounts? Or mine?" He stared at her. "What's that supposed to mean?" She let the silence stretch, then inhaled slowly. "It means I talked to Robert," she said. "And to a few other people whose badges impressed the bank more than your suit." Color drained from his face, leaving 2 bright spots high on his cheeks. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I protected what's mine," she said.
From you, Marcus Hellstrom. The name landed between them like broken glass. For a heartbeat, his expression went blank: shock, denial, calculation, all flickering too quickly to read. Then the mask shattered. His posture changed first. The charming, slightly self-deprecating husband vanished. The man standing in front of her straightened, eyes hard, mouth flattening into a line she'd never seen but somehow recognized. "So," he said softly. Jonas finally earned his keep. Lena's pulse pounded, but her voice stayed even. "You've done this before," she said. "Amelia. Priya. Nora. The others. I've seen their names. Their bankruptcies. Their hospital records." He smirked. "You went digging," he said. "How entrepreneurial of you." "Why me?" she asked. "You had plenty of options. Plenty of rich, grieving women. Why bother with a woman who actually reads the contracts you put in front of her?" "Because you were the perfect combination," he said, almost bored. "Rich, busy, guilty. You wanted someone to tell you it was okay to stop paying attention. All I had to do was offer to carry the weight." He stepped closer. The wire picked up the quiet scrape of his shoes on the hardwood. "I watched your interviews," he continued. "Read every profile. Saw how much you hated that Iron Heiress title. You didn't just want a partner, Lena. You wanted an alibi. Someone who could make it look like you cared about something other than money. I gave you that. You practically handed me the keys in return." "How many of us have there been?" she asked. He shrugged. "Enough," he said. "Enough to keep things interesting. Enough to buy a small country if I want one. Belize is just the next stop." "You were really going to disappear," she said. "After emptying my accounts." "Oh, sweetheart." His smile was pure contempt. "You were never the destination. You were the vehicle. I don't fall in love with cars." The words stung more than she wanted them to. "And if the sedative in my wine hadn't worked," she pressed. "If I'd refused to sign something you needed?" "Plan B," he said. "Trip. Fall. Car accident. Grief makes people clumsy. Your board would have fallen over themselves to rubber stamp anything that kept the company stable." He said it like he was talking about the weather. The recorder drank in every syllable. "You're confessing to attempted fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy in my living room," Lena said quietly. "Do you understand that?" He laughed. "To who?" he asked. "You? You're not going to the police. You'd have to admit you were fooled. That you let me inside. That you didn't see it coming." He was wrong. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" he whispered. Lena didn't answer. The sirens cut abruptly as vehicles stopped outside the building. The flash of red and blue bled through the curtains. Then came the pounding on the door. "Federal agents," a voice shouted. "Open up." Marcus bolted. He sprinted toward the back of the apartment, yanking the sliding balcony door open. Lena stayed on the couch, hands folded, watching the man who'd sold himself as her savior scramble like a cornered animal. Agents burst through the front door as he cleared the threshold. "Marcus Hellstrom," one shouted. "Stop. Hands where we can see them." He vaulted the balcony rail, dropping into the postage stamp backyard below. He made it 3 steps before 2 officers tackled him into the grass. The sound he made when he hit the ground was not dignified, not composed. It was the sound of a man who'd always believed he was smarter than everyone else suddenly discovering he wasn't. From the kitchen, Janet appeared with an agent at her shoulder, recorder already in hand. "Got every word," she said to Lena. "Beautifully done." Lena nodded, but her throat had closed up. They cuffed Marcus and dragged him, mud-streaked and cursing, through the living room. He twisted to look at her. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You think they won't love the story of the greedy heiress who set up her own husband?" "If they do," Lena said, voice steady, "they'll hear it in your own words." He paled. Helena and Victor were picked up within hours, Helena at a co-working space in Midtown, Victor at a country club halfway to the airport. Robert called to tell her. Jonas texted photos of their mugshots with a grim satisfaction. Only then, when the door finally shut and the apartment fell quiet, did Lena let herself cry. Not because she was broken. Because she wasn't. Because she was still here. The story went everywhere. "Romance fraudster exposed by heiress wife," one headline screamed. "Man with 5 names, 1 scam," read another. News segments replayed the footage of Marcus, now Marcus Hellstrom, being led into a courthouse in an orange jumpsuit. Commentators dissected how a man like that could infiltrate circles like hers. Talk shows invited psychologists to explain the psychology of manipulation and greed. More importantly, women started calling. First 3. Then 6. Then 12. They had different accents, different lives, different stories. But the pattern was the same: charismatic man, whirlwind romance, help with finances, a sudden crater where their lives used to be. Some had been his direct victims. Others had married different men with the same script. Lena made space for all of them. At trial, they sat together in the gallery, a row of women who had once been marks and were now, unmistakably, witnesses. Financial experts walked the jury through the maze of shell companies. Forensic analysts showed how signatures had been forged, how emails had been spoofed, how tiny test transfers had grown into full-scale theft. Marcus's attorneys tried a familiar playbook. They painted him as a loving husband caught in an overcomplicated estate mess. Suggested that Lena, consumed by control and grief, had overreacted, then orchestrated a narrative to punish him when he tried to set boundaries. Vindictive, one called her. Emotionally unstable. Obsessed with power. Then the prosecution pressed play on the recordings. The jury heard his real voice, flat, cold, amused, as he described women as vehicles, as he outlined Plan B, as he laughed at the idea that she'd ever go to the police. They heard the moment she called him by his real name and the mask dropped. They heard everything. When it was Lena's turn on the stand, she didn't try to be anything but what she was. She talked about grief and arrogance. About how easy it was to believe that being smart in one arena made you invincible in another. About the shame of missing what now seemed obvious. And she talked about the other women. The ones who'd been told they were crazy for suspecting something, who'd been gaslit until they doubted their own signatures. "I'm not here because I'm rich," she said, looking at the jury. "I'm here because I finally listened to the voice that said, something is wrong, and because I had people who believed me when I did. Not everyone gets that chance." He counted on that. When the verdict came back guilty on all major counts, fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, money laundering, Marcus stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. He didn't look at her once.
At sentencing, the judge called his crimes a methodical campaign of exploitation and handed down 27 years in federal prison. Lena walked out into the sunlight, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward.
Jonas and Janet flanked her.
Behind them, the other victims stood together, no longer a list of case numbers but a small, fierce army.
She spoke briefly. Not about him. About them. About what came next.
The Caldwell Shield Foundation began in a borrowed conference room with a whiteboard and too much coffee. By year's end, it had offices in 3 cities, a 24-hour hotline, and partnerships with legal aid organizations across the country. They offered financial literacy workshops, trauma-informed counseling, pro bono legal support for women untangling themselves from financial predators.
Survivors started flying in for weekend summits.
They shared bank statements and court strategies, but also stories, jokes, recipes.
They rebuilt.
Lena spent her days in meetings about zoning appeals and fraud prevention curriculum. Her nights were often spent reviewing intake reports from the Foundation's newest cases.
Caldwell Holdings stabilized. It grew. But the line on her bio that mattered most to her now wasn't CEO.
It was founder, Caldwell Shield. One evening, long after most of the team had gone home, Lena sat in her office overlooking the city.
The lights below looked different now, not like assets, but like windows full of individual lives she'd never know.
Her phone buzzed.
Unknown number. Short text. I think my partner is stealing from me. I don't know who else to call. For a second, she was back at that candlelit table, glass trembling in her hand.
Only this time, she wasn't the one being warned.
She typed back. You're not alone. We'll help you.
She set the phone down and rose, smoothing the front of her blazer.
Outside her office, the Foundation's logo glowed on the wall, a simple shield, stylized into the outline of a woman standing upright.
Lena stepped toward the door, toward the work waiting on the other side. Whatever predators thought they'd find easy marks in the dark, they were in for a surprise. She had walked into the fight of her life and come out the other side.
Stronger. Wiser. Unbreakable. Subscribe before the next story drops. Comment your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next story.